Hello, my name is Mara and welcome to Books Like Whoa. In today's Project Poirot, we are talking about the book Dumb Witness, which is also known as Poirot Loses a Client. Now, it is called Dumb Witness in the sense of unable to speak, not in the sense of cognitively impaired. So just to be clear there, basically it's an allusion to the fact that the main witness is dead and therefore cannot directly speak. So if you've never watched one of my Project Poirot videos before, just so you know, these are spoiler free. I take the plot synopsis roughly up through when we find a body and then I leave it well enough alone. So if you have not yet read this book, no worries, you can keep watching without any spoilers. So for this one, I'm not sure how we're gonna decide where to cut off. We'll see as we go. But basically, this is a story about Poirot. And he gets this letter from a Mrs. Arundel. And it's sort of an interesting letter. It's dated oddly, and he receives it several months after it was dated. And he is intrigued by it, and his, good pal Hastings is in town with him. And they decide to go down to Market Basing to investigate exactly why she was asking for Poirot's help, because she basically says that she feels like her life was in danger. And when they get to Market Basing and they go to the house, they realize that Mrs. Arundel is already dead. However, nobody thinks that this is murder. Basically, she had a nasty fall a couple of weeks before she died, but she ultimately died of what appeared to be some sort of liver issue. And so nobody thinks that she was killed. Nobody is worried about this. Basically, this is a story in which there's no police involved because the police don't think that there's been a crime. Poirot, of course, however, is suspicious, and so he starts poking around. And come to find out, that accident that caused Mrs. Arundel to write to him happened a couple of weeks earlier. Everybody in the house thinks that she essentially tripped on the dog's ball and took a tumble down the stairs, but she clearly did not think that that was what had happened. And so Poirot is also suspicious that that's not what happened. But as a result of that, because she thought it wasn't an accident, she decided to disinherit the relatives who were staying with her at the time because she thinks that they are trying to kill her in order to get her money. So instead of the money going to her relatives, right now the money is supposed to go to her companion of less than a year, and it is something, I think, like £400,000, which, I mean, in a book that we'll talk about next week, somebody buys a used car for £15, so just to give you a scale of what a shit ton of money that must have been, this is definitely a fortune, and it's all been left to this companion instead of to her relatives. Now, basically, Mrs. Arundel was the only kind of surviving member of her generation. All of her brothers and sisters who had kids have already passed, so her only living relatives are two nieces and a nephew. Her niece Bella is married to a Greek doctor and has a few children, and she's, kind of plain, but I guess, wishes she was fancier, basically. She has a niece, Teresa, who is very fancy and somewhat of a spendthrift. So Teresa and her brother Charles have already been left a good amount of money from their parents, but both of them basically have already blown through it. And Teresa is very fashionable, and she wants to marry this young doctor named Rex, and she was hoping that her aunt, I guess, would give her some advanced money, but her aunt was not wanting to do that, obviously. So there's some suspicion there. And then, like I said, her brother Charles is just basically kind of a waste of space. He's very charming, but he's just sort of a rascal, I guess, or scoundrel. He just sort of floats around doing nothing. So basically, Poirot is spending this book trying to figure out if that first incident was an accident or not. Of course, he thinks that it wasn't, but he's trying to figure out that definitively. And then he's trying to figure out if her death was actually just one of those things with her liver, or if she was killed in some way. So I think that this is an above average, middle of the road Christie, if that makes sense. It's not, I think there's probably not many people who would say that this is their favorite Agatha Christie, but it's super solid. There's interesting characters, which, she always has. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say much about this because I just don't think that there's that much of note happening. It's a good entertainment. I think that probably the thing that's most worth discussing in terms of our project that we've been doing is that Mrs. Arundel sort of represents a real transition between the lingering space of Victorian morality and the new kind of like 20th century perspective on things. So Mrs. Arundel definitely has a very sort of like conservative point of view in terms of what she expects her relatives to be doing or not doing, and she doesn't really like any of them. So it's not... she wasn't necessarily excited to leave her money to any of them, but she also has that sort of sense of like family pride and sort of this idea of like continuity between the generations in terms of concentrating wealth. So, you know, she was going to do it, but I think when she realizes that one of them may be trying to kill her, she's just so, like, that's just the final straw. Even if she couldn't prove it, she just is done, basically. And I think that we're meant to see a real contrast between generations here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is just another example in what has been and will continue to be a long line of kind of typical Christie scenarios that set up a murder, which is interfering or conservative older people with money versus their younger counterparts. And the older conservative person always dies. And I'm not sure if that's meant to be an indictment on their unwillingness to kind of evolve with the times, because, you know, I'm not going to say that Agatha Christie was like hip and with it, but she consistently displays a lot of sort of like empathy or sympathy with the point of view of young people who are trying to kind of be frivolous and gay. Gay in the sense of like happy. So I don't know. I think that she has a real ambivalence towards like kind of older, stodgier people. But like, I mean, not total spoilers, but like just in terms of like, if you've been following along, you'll hear me often reference to like Christie tricks or Christie tropes. One of the giveaways, if you're starting to read a Christie novel and there's an older person with money who's sort of resentful towards the younger generation, it's a pretty good bet that they're going to be the one killed, because they just consistently don't seem to make it. The other notable thing here is probably the fact that there's a good amount of xenophobia as a part of sort of the characterization. So essentially, Mrs. Arundel probably would have liked her niece Bella if she had not married this Greek doctor. There's consistent references to like, okay, yeah, he's charming and he's good looking, but he's Greek. Oh yeah, he's a good doctor, but he's Greek. So there's a lot of like overt racism basically towards Southern or / Eastern Europeans. And it's interesting because I think Christie uses those stereotypes to sort of play with our expectations. One thing to keep in mind is the fact that Agatha Christie's dad was American. So I think because she sort of had the experience of living with a foreigner, I think she can see through some of the English sort of xenophobia maybe a little bit more than potentially some of her other contemporaries. And again, it's just because she had the experience of living in the house with someone who would have been considered like, oh, the foreigner. And so she's half American. She has the perspective of not totally buying into that whole kind of facade of like, oh, well, you know, if they're not British, you can't trust them. And this book is just another exploration, which we will encounter many times in Christie, of essentially like what desperation will make people do. And that's a huge part of what this book is centering on. Like, each of these three people who are sort of the suspects all were desperate to some degree to get that money and would have been in a really bad situation if they didn't get the money. So, and, you know, they don't, basically, right? Because she leaves it to someone else. And that person is also a suspect, I should say, because, you know, hey, she just inherited a shit ton of money. Did she forge the will? Did she induce Mrs. Arundel into writing it? That's an element as well. But I think that this, in terms of like kind of the moral themes of this particular book, I think that it's meant to be sort of a meditation on, you never know exactly what somebody's kind of breaking or tipping point is. People who are desperate do desperate things. So that's really kind of the biggest takeaway from this book. I don't find this to be a particularly remarkable Christie book, though I do think it's very competently written and perfectly enjoyable. I like it better than a lot of the other middle-of-the-road ones. I'll put my ranking here, but I don't necessarily think it's a favorite. It's kind of, like, I'd read this before, but it was pretty forgettable to me then, and it still sort of is now, though both times I gave it a 4 star, so I think I must enjoy it while I'm in the middle of it, but afterwards I'm always sort of like, huh, what was that about again? So anyway. take that for what it's worth. So yeah, this was another pretty good installment in the Poirot oeuvre, and next week is a fantastic installment, which is Death on the Nile. I can't wait to talk to you guys about that one because it's just good. So anyway, we will talk about that then, but in the meantime, let me know if you've read this book and let me know what you think about it. And yeah, I think that that's going to do it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all of that information listed in the description box below. And I think that that will do it. I hope you're having a fantastic week, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!